When I came to you, brethren, I did not come proclaiming to you the testimony of God in lofty words or wisdom. For I desired to know nothing among you except Jesus Christ and Him crucified. The first letter of Paul to the Corinthians, chapter 2, verses 1 and 2. These words of St. Paul, my dear brothers and sisters, explain to us the meaning of Good Friday. The passion of St. Paul to know Christ, to proclaim Him crucified, is the meaning of the Good Friday. Paul tells us he wants to proclaim Christ crucified. His crucifixion bought us the salvation. So every year when we reflect on Good Friday about the death of Jesus Christ, we have in mind this crucified Christ, the symbol of ultimate love. And every year on Good Friday we have the Passion narrative from the Gospel of John. And today I would like to reflect with you a particular passage, a particular episode from this Passion narrative of John. That is the death of Jesus and the piercing of the side of Jesus with a spear. We read it in the Gospel of John chapter 19 verses 31 to 37. Since it was a day of preparation in order to prevent the bodies from remaining on the cross on the Sabbath, Jews asked Pilate that their legs might be broken and that they might be taken away. So the soldiers came and broke the legs of the first and of the other who had been crucified with him. But when they came to Jesus and saw that he was already dead, they did not break his legs. But one of the soldiers pierced his side with a spear, and at once there came out blood and water. He who saw it has borne witness. His testimony is true, and he knows that he tells the truth, that you also may believe. For these things took place, that the scripture might be fulfilled. Not a bone of him shall be broken. And again another scripture says, they shall look on him whom they have pierced. What is the meaning of this episode? Why does John highlight that he saw blood and water coming from the heart of Jesus, coming from the side of Jesus? He emphatically tells us he saw it. He testifies to it. John has a special intention behind this. He interrupts the flow of the narrative and he adds his own comments. So we should have special attention to it. John tells us these things took place so that the scripture might be fulfilled. He is referring back to the book of Prophet Zechariah, chapter 12, verse 10. We read, and I will pour out on the house of David and the inhabitants of Jerusalem a spirit of compassion and supplication, so that when they look on him whom they have pierced, they shall mourn for him as one mourns for an only child, and weep bitterly over him as one weeps over a firstborn. And chapter 13 verse 1, on that day there shall be a fountain opened for the house of David and the inhabitants of Jerusalem, to cleanse them from sin and uncleanness. So John is referring back to the book of Prophet Zechariah. And this passage from Zechariah is a description of a shepherd, of a mysterious figure who is being pierced. And later this figure came to be identified with the messianic figure. So John tells us this Jesus who is pierced is this messianic figure. And when the prophet Zechariah tells, on that day there shall be a fountain opened for the house of David and the inhabitants of Jerusalem, to cleanse them from sin and uncleanness. That's what Jesus did. This fountain, this blood and water from the side of Christ, is this fountain. That's what John tells us. And what is the purpose of this fountain? To cleanse the house of Israel, not only the house of Israel, to cleanse the mankind from the slavery of sin. That's why John tells us, this fountain is to cleanse the sins of humanity. So that is the first meaning of this blood and water flowing from the side of Jesus. And secondly, to understand this passage, we need to look at Jesus as the new Adam. For that we need to go back to the book of Genesis, chapter 2, to the creation story. In chapter 2 we see how God forms woman from the rib of Adam. God causes a deep sleep. He takes out a rib from the side of Adam, and then he forms the woman, who is later called Eve. So when we read the English translation, we have the word rib. But when we look at the Hebrew text, it tells us God took a side from Adam, and then he formed Eve. A side from Adam. So look at Jesus. Blood and water flowing from the side of Jesus. And Saint Augustine, when he comments on the death of Jesus, he tells us the water flowing from the side of Christ is already prefigured in the Old Testament. God formed woman from the side of Adam, and Adam is a prefiguration of Christ. Adam is a type of Christ. In the same manner, the woman that comes out, that is being formed from the side of Adam, is the prefiguration of the church. So St. Augustine is basically telling us, it is from this pierced side of Christ that the church is formed. The church is born out of the side of Christ. This flowing water is the source of sacraments, we read in the Catechism of the Catholic Church. So St. Augustine is of the idea that Eve prefigures the church. Just like Eve came out from the side of Adam, the church is born from the side of Christ. Pope Benedict, in his encyclical letter, Deus Caritas Est, God is love, tells us, if we want to know the meaning of love, look at the cross. There we see the love in its ultimate form. If we want to know what is love, look at Christ crucified. And that's what we are doing today. We look at him and we understand how he loves us. He gives himself, he gives his own humanity and divinity for the life of the church. He gives himself for us to free us from the slavery of sin. So we are as the members of the church, called to draw our power from this pierced side of Christ. That's why Paul tells us, I would like to proclaim Him crucified. So today let us read this passage especially and reflect on the love of Christ. The sign, crucifixion, is the sign of ultimate love. Amen.